Imagine being the CEO of a successful tech company, standing at the peak of your career, surrounded by awards, luxurious furniture, and the stunning view of the city skyline from your corner office. You've worked tirelessly to build this empire, and every inch of your office reflects that hard work. But today, none of that matters. Today, that skyline feels hollow. This is the unsettling reality for Malik Johnson, the CEO of Tech Vision. A company he built with his own hands is now at a crossroads. Malik had always been proud of his company's achievements: innovation, growth, accolades from the industry. Tech Vision had climbed to the top, seemingly unstoppable. But beneath the surface, a storm had been brewing, one that Malik hadn't seen until now. On the surface, Tech Vision looks like a beacon of success, but behind the scenes, there's a growing problem. Malik sits at his desk, staring at the latest employee satisfaction report, his brow furrowed with deep concern. A 15% drop in employee satisfaction for the third month in a row? How had this slipped under his radar? As he flipped through the report, the same words kept jumping out at him: toxic culture, favoritism, poor leadership, and even potential racism. These complaints were clustered around one office in particular, the Virginia branch, the very place Malik had once considered a shining example of the company's culture. The questions swirled in his mind. How had things deteriorated so quickly? Why hadn't anyone from the management team addressed these concerns? The deeper he looked, the more troubled he became. For a CEO who prided himself on building a culture of innovation, inclusivity, and respect, this was devastating. Tech Vision wasn't just a business to Malik, it was his legacy. A company he had built from the ground up, one that stood for progress and empowerment. But now, it seemed that something was deeply wrong, and Malik wasn't going to let it slide. But how could he fix it? His board of directors had offered their opinions: restructure the Virginia office, launch an internal investigation, hold focus groups. But none of these solutions felt like enough. Malik had a bold idea, a drastic one. He would go undercover as a receptionist in his own company. It wasn't an easy decision. Malik was fully aware of the risks. If his identity was discovered, it could turn into a PR nightmare. What would the media say if they found out the CEO of a major tech company had to disguise himself just to figure out what was wrong with his own staff? Beyond that, what if his employees found out? The trust between him and his team could be shattered. But Malik knew that there was no other way to understand what was really going on inside his company. He had to see it for himself, not from the comfort of his corner office, but from the front lines. This was his chance to see the company through the eyes of his employees, to uncover the truth about the culture he had created. So, with his heart pounding in his chest, Malik took the plunge. Gone was the sharp suit, the polished Oxfords, and the commanding presence that once made him the most respected figure in the boardroom. In their place, he donned a standard-issue receptionist uniform, complete with scuffed shoes that didn't quite fit right. He even added a fake mustache and glasses to obscure his face, just enough to keep his identity hidden. As he looked in the mirror, the weight of what he was about to do hit him. This was more than just a disguise. This was his chance to fix what had gone wrong. This was his chance to reconnect with the employees he had once known so well. Would they recognize him? Would they even care? With a mix of nerves and hope, Malik walked into the building that had once felt like home. But today, it felt foreign. For the first time in years, he wasn't the CEO. He was a nobody, just another face in the crowd. His heart raced as he approached the front desk, a place he had passed by countless times without a second thought. Today, it was his new reality. The phone rang incessantly, the lobby buzzed with activity, and for the first time, Malik felt overwhelmed. He wasn't in control. He wasn't calling the shots, and no one recognized him. As he sat at the desk, fumbling with the phone system and greeting visitors, it became painfully clear how disconnected he had become from the daily grind of his employees. The once familiar office now felt like an alien world. The phone weighed heavy in his hand as he struggled to keep up with the flow of calls and visitors. Every interaction revealed something new, something troubling. The people around him moved at a frantic pace, but no one looked him in the eye. It was as if he was invisible. During one particularly busy moment, Malik overheard a conversation between two senior managers near the reception area. They were discussing the latest email about new efficiency measures. "Did you see that?" one of them said. "More work for less pay. Just what we needed." The other manager shrugged, clearly indifferent. "Not our problem. Let HR deal with the complaints. We've got more important things to focus on." Their words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. Had his leadership allowed this kind of callousness to grow within his company? Was this how his managers spoke about the very people who kept the business running? As the managers walked away, oblivious to the fact that they had just spoken in front of their CEO, Malik felt the first pangs of regret. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed this level of disrespect for his employees? His journey had just begun, but the truth was already beginning to reveal itself in ways that left him speechless. Malik Johnson leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the report on his desk. The numbers didn't lie. A 15% drop in employee satisfaction for the third straight month at his Virginia office. He shook his head in disbelief. How had things gone downhill so fast? The reports were not just numbers. They were filled with grievances, complaints of favoritism, toxic workplace culture, and even hints of racial discrimination. As the CEO of Tech Vision, Malik had built his company on values of inclusivity, innovation, and mutual respect. And yet, here he was, blindsided by a crisis he didn't see coming. The Virginia office had once been the jewel of Tech Vision, representing everything Malik had strived for in his company. It was where new ideas took flight, where employees once thrived in a positive, empowering environment. But now, it had become a place of discontent. The very foundation he'd worked so hard to build seemed to be crumbling beneath him. Malik wasn't the type of leader who could simply brush off such serious issues. His first instinct was to trust the systems he had put in place, hold internal meetings, conduct focus groups, maybe launch a survey to get to the bottom of the problem. But then he paused. Hadn't he already tried those things? They had worked in the past, but now they felt like band-aid solutions to a much bigger issue. This wasn't just about procedures or policies. It was about something deeper. Something was wrong with the culture itself. He thought back to the early days of Tech Vision, when he knew every employee by name, when the culture was more like a family. Was that why this had slipped through the cracks? Had he become too removed from the day-to-day realities of his company? Then, in a moment of quiet clarity, the solution came to him. It was bold, it was risky, and it might just be crazy. But it felt right. What if he went undercover? What if he could blend into the fabric of his own company, not as the CEO, but as one of the employees? Malik had read stories of CEOs who went undercover in their companies to get a real sense of what was going on. At first, it seemed far-fetched. He was too recognizable. His face had been splashed across business magazines. He had spoken at conferences, and he had become a respected name in the tech industry. Surely, someone would recognize him. And yet, the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the only option. The reports he had been receiving weren't giving him the full picture. They never did. Real company culture didn't live in board meetings or performance reviews. It lived in the conversations between employees, in the break rooms, at the front desk, and in the everyday struggles of the people who made the company run. If Malik was going to understand what was truly happening at Tech Vision, he needed to see it for himself. It wasn't an easy decision. If he was discovered, it could lead to a PR disaster. The thought of the headlines made his stomach churn. CEO goes undercover, loses faith in leadership, or worse, CEO caught spying on employees. It could break the fragile trust between him and his staff, who already seemed disconnected from the top levels of leadership. And yet, doing nothing felt like an even greater risk. Malik was determined to fix this, even if it meant stepping into uncomfortable territory. The next challenge was how to do it without being recognized. Malik had to completely erase his CEO persona. Gone were the sharp tailored suits and polished leather shoes that had become his signature look. He traded them in for a standard-issue receptionist uniform, gray, plain, and utterly forgettable. He also added a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and a simple cap, just enough to break up his recognizable features. But the final touch? A fake mustache, a little cliché perhaps, but effective. Standing in front of the mirror, Malik barely recognized himself. The man staring back wasn't the powerful CEO who commanded respect in boardrooms. Instead, he was just another face in the crowd, a nobody. And for the first time in years, he felt a flutter of nerves. Could he really pull this off? Could he convincingly blend into the very company he had built? Only time would tell. With his disguise complete, Malik set his sights on the Virginia office, the epicenter of the problem. He arrived early, slipping in through the back entrance unnoticed. No grand entrances today, no formal greetings from his staff. As he walked through the familiar halls, it felt oddly foreign. He was no longer the leader of this empire, but an outsider. At the front desk, he met Doris, the seasoned receptionist he would be working alongside. She was in her mid-50s, with a sharp tongue and an even sharper eye for detail. "So, you're the new temp, huh?" she asked, barely glancing at him. "Yeah," Malik replied, keeping his voice casual. "Name's Mike." Doris didn't bother with pleasantries. She immediately launched into the rundown of the job, answering phones, greeting visitors, managing schedules. Malik nodded along, pretending to take notes, but in reality, his mind was already racing. From this vantage point, he had a front-row seat to observe the company's inner workings. As the day progressed, it didn't take long for Malik to notice the cracks. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Employees moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, their faces set in grim determination. There was no chatter, no camaraderie, just a sense of urgency and fear. It wasn't long before Malik overheard his first troubling conversation. Two senior managers stood near the reception area, discussing the latest email about new efficiency measures. "Did you see the latest from HR?" one asked, sounding annoyed. "Yeah," the other replied, rolling his eyes. "More work for us, and the customer service team's already buried in complaints. But whatever, not our problem." Malik's heart sank. This was the leadership team he had trusted? This casual disregard for their own employees? He had built Tech Vision on the belief that everyone, from the receptionist to the senior manager, played an important role. Yet, here were two of his managers dismissing the concerns of their staff as nothing more than an inconvenience. The day dragged on, and the more Malik listened, the more concerned he became. He overheard a group of mid-level managers complaining about the new efficiency measures, blaming HR for not giving them more resources. But instead of offering support, they passed the responsibility onto the already overworked employees. At lunch, Malik sat in the break room, watching as employees hurriedly ate their meals, many of them looking stressed and exhausted. The tension in the air was palpable, but the worst part? No one seemed to care. The managers walked around with an air of indifference, completely disconnected from the reality their teams were facing. It was during this break that Malik met Henry, an IT worker with a warm smile and a calming presence. Henry offered Malik some friendly advice. "Don't take it too seriously," he said, referring to the chaos of the front desk. "They'll expect you to keep up, but they won't notice if you're drowning." Malik smiled politely, but Henry's words hit harder than he expected. They won't notice if you're drowning. Was this really how employees felt at Tech Vision? That they were invisible, left to struggle without recognition or support? By the end of the day, Malik was emotionally and physically drained. The job itself had been challenging, but it was the conversations, the attitudes, and the disregard for employee well-being that weighed on him. As he removed his uniform and looked at himself in the mirror, the reality of what he had witnessed began to sink in. The company he had built, his pride and joy, had drifted so far from the values he had once cherished. The disconnect between the leadership team and the employees was staggering. And worse, Malik had been blind to it all. But now, armed with a deeper understanding of the problem, Malik knew what he had to do. Going undercover wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about taking action to fix what was broken before it was too late. The first day of any job can be nerve-wracking, but for Malik Johnson, it was more than just first-day jitters. As he walked through the front doors of Tech Vision's Virginia office, now disguised as Mike, the temporary receptionist, a wave of unfamiliarity hit him. For the first time in years, he wasn't the CEO with the power to make decisions. Today, he was just another employee, entering the building with no status, no authority, and no expectations. His sharp business attire had been replaced with a standard receptionist uniform, his polished Oxfords traded for scuffed shoes, and his air of confidence was hidden behind a fake mustache. The hum of the office greeted him as he approached the front desk. The atmosphere was tense, unlike the upbeat and vibrant environment he had always imagined his company embodied. Employees rushed by, their heads down, focused on their tasks. No one acknowledged him, no one smiled. It was as if he were invisible. Doris, the seasoned receptionist he had met the day before, was already at the desk when he arrived. She greeted him with a curt nod, clearly not interested in small talk. Malik wasn't offended. In fact, he preferred it that way. He wanted to blend in, observe, and understand the dynamics of his company from the ground up. "So, you're Mike, right?" Doris asked, adjusting her reading glasses as she glanced at the computer screen. "Well, Mike, this is your post. You answer the phones, manage appointments, and direct visitors. Simple enough, but the phones can get crazy, so try to keep up." Malik nodded, feigning the nervousness of a new hire. He took his seat at the front desk, feeling out of place but determined to play his role. The phone rang almost immediately, and Malik fumbled to answer it. His hands, usually steady when signing contracts or giving presentations, now felt clumsy as he struggled with the switchboard. "Tech Vision, how can I help you?" he stammered, his voice shaky with the unfamiliarity of the task. The person on the other end rattled off a series of instructions too quickly for Malik to process, and he found himself overwhelmed. He managed to transfer the call, but felt the pressure of the fast-paced environment weigh on him almost instantly. Doris chuckled softly, overhearing his struggle. "It's not as easy as it looks, huh?" Malik smiled weakly, feeling a hint of embarrassment. This was a job he had never given much thought to, but now that he was in the thick of it, he realized just how demanding it was. And this was just the beginning. As the day wore on, Malik began to notice things he had never seen before. From his vantage point at the front desk, he could observe almost everything that happened in the office. Employees moved in and out, often in a hurry, but what struck him most was the detachment. There was little interaction between team members, no casual conversations or shared laughter. Everyone seemed to be in their own world, focused solely on their tasks. Malik also overheard conversations that made his stomach turn. Early in the afternoon, two senior managers stopped by the front desk, waiting for a visitor. They didn't pay much attention to Malik, assuming he was just another temp. "Did you see the new email about the customer service team?" one manager said, shaking his head. "They're complaining about the workload again. Honestly, I don't know what they expect us to do about it. We've got bigger things to worry about." The other manager shrugged. "Yeah, it's not our problem. Let HR handle it. I've got a meeting with the board next week. I don't have time for this nonsense." Malik's chest tightened. Was this how his leadership team viewed their employees? Dismissing their concerns as nonsense and pushing their problems onto someone else? He had always believed that Tech Vision's success was built on the dedication of every employee, from the top executives to the entry-level workers. But now, he was seeing a stark disconnect between the values he had tried to instill and the reality of the office culture. Throughout the day, Malik continued to struggle with the tasks he had always taken for granted. The switchboard was relentless, the phone calls constant. He was juggling requests from visitors, employees, and callers, trying to stay on top of the chaos. But it wasn't just the physical demands of the job that were wearing him down. It was the emotional toll of realizing how far removed the leadership had become from the everyday experiences of their employees. During a particularly quiet moment in the afternoon, Malik finally had a chance to take a breath. He leaned back in his chair, watching as a group of employees walked past the front desk, chatting among themselves. For the first time that day, he noticed a familiar face among them. Linda, one of the senior managers he had been warned about. Linda was known for her no-nonsense attitude, but also for her harsh treatment of employees. As Malik watched her interactions with others, he began to see what had been hidden from him for so long. Linda's behavior was condescending and dismissive. She rarely looked at the lower-level employees she was speaking to, and when she did, her tone was sharp and critical. At one point, she snapped at a junior employee for not completing a task on time, even though it was clear that the workload was overwhelming. "Is this seriously how you're handling things?" Linda said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she gestured toward the front desk. "Phones ringing off the hook, papers everywhere, and you can't even keep up. No wonder this place is falling apart." Her words stung more than Malik expected. As the CEO, he had always believed in fostering a positive, respectful work environment. But here was one of his senior managers tearing into him over his receptionist duties. Of course, she didn't know who he really was, but that wasn't the point. Her harshness, her lack of empathy, this wasn't the leadership he had envisioned for Tech Vision. Linda's behavior wasn't just an isolated incident, either. As the day wore on, Malik began to notice a pattern. Senior managers like Linda seemed to operate with an air of superiority, treating lower-level employees with little respect. Conversations in the break room often revolved around complaints about the staff, with managers blaming their teams for problems they had no control over. Malik overheard one particularly disturbing conversation in the break room during his afternoon break. "I don't know why we even bother with these people," one manager said, laughing with a colleague. "Half of them don't know what they're doing, and the other half are just waiting for their next paycheck." The casual disdain in their voices hit Malik like a physical blow. Was this the culture he had unknowingly allowed to fester in his company? A culture where managers mocked their own teams and dismissed their struggles as incompetence? The realization was hard to swallow. Malik had come into this undercover assignment hoping to understand where things had gone wrong, but he hadn't anticipated just how deep the problem ran. It wasn't just about workload or processes. It was about the attitudes that had taken root within his leadership team. The very people he had entrusted to uphold the company's values were the ones undermining them. But amid the chaos and disillusionment, Malik found a glimmer of hope. Doris, the receptionist who had been guiding him throughout the day, was a beacon of resilience in the office. Despite the constant demands of her job, she remained patient and composed, handling the never-ending stream of calls and visitors with a quiet efficiency. She didn't engage in the toxic conversations that swirled around her. Instead, she focused on doing her job well, even if no one seemed to notice. During a lull in the afternoon, Doris turned to Malik and offered him a knowing smile. "It's just a job," she said, her voice low but steady. "Don't expect anyone up there to notice what we do down here. To them, we're invisible." Her words hit Malik like a gut punch. He had always prided himself on running a company where every employee felt valued, where hard work was acknowledged and rewarded. But here was Doris, a longtime employee who had given years of service to the company, expressing the exact opposite sentiment. She didn't expect recognition, because in her experience, it never came. By the end of the day, Malik's body was exhausted from the demands of the job, but it was the emotional toll that weighed on him the most. He had started this undercover assignment hoping to gain insight into his company's operations, to find areas for improvement. But instead, he had uncovered an ugly truth, a culture of disrespect and detachment that cut to the very core of the organization he had built. As he removed his uniform and looked at his reflection in the lobby's glass doors, Malik saw a different man staring back at him. The face was tired, worn from a day of answering phones and juggling appointments. But more than that, it was the face of someone who had been confronted with a harsh reality. The company he had built, the company he had once been so proud of, was crumbling from within. But Malik wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. The problems at Tech Vision were bigger than he had anticipated, but now that he had seen the truth, he was determined to fix it. The question was, how? By Malik's second day as Mike, the temporary receptionist, the initial nervousness had faded. But what replaced it wasn't comfort. It was a growing sense of unease. The more he blended into the background of his own company, the more he saw the toxic culture simmering beneath the surface. As he settled into the routine of answering phones, directing visitors, and greeting staff, Malik began to truly understand the weight of the complaints he had read in the employee satisfaction report. On paper, they were just numbers, percentages, and anonymous feedback. But now, those reports had faces, names, and voices. And the voices were clear. Something was deeply wrong. It didn't take long for Malik to recognize the office's social hierarchy. There were those who held power and influence, managers and department heads like Linda, and then there were the workers who stayed out of the spotlight, who were expected to simply follow orders without question. The line between the two groups was stark. Employees on the lower rungs of the corporate ladder were invisible, just as Doris had warned him. The managers treated them as tools, not people, and that attitude had trickled down through the ranks, infecting the entire culture. One of the first things Malik noticed was how disengaged the employees seemed. In a place where innovation and collaboration were supposed to thrive, there was instead a sense of isolation. Employees worked silently at their desks, eyes glued to their screens, hardly interacting with one another. It was a far cry from the lively, dynamic environment Malik had envisioned when he first built the company. On his second day, Malik had a chance to observe Linda more closely. She was a key player in the Virginia office, someone who had always been praised by upper management for her efficiency and results-driven approach. But what Malik saw was far from leadership. Linda ruled her department with an iron fist, and it was clear that fear was her preferred management style. She barked orders at her team, rarely offering any encouragement or support. Her interactions with junior employees were cold, and at times, outright cruel. At one point, Malik witnessed a particularly harsh exchange between Linda and a young customer service representative. The employee had been struggling to keep up with a flood of customer complaints, and when she tried to explain the situation to Linda, she was met with an icy response. "That's not my problem," Linda snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're supposed to handle this. If you can't do your job, we'll find someone who can." The young woman looked visibly shaken, but Linda didn't seem to care. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the employee standing there, stunned. Malik felt a surge of anger rising within him. Was this how his managers were treating their teams, with cold indifference and threats of replacement? As the day went on, Malik saw more examples of this toxic behavior. Senior managers like Linda seemed to thrive on control, using fear and intimidation to keep their teams in line. It wasn't about fostering growth or supporting employees, it was about maintaining power. In the break room that afternoon, Malik overheard another disturbing conversation. This time, it was between two mid-level managers who were discussing the state of the company's customer service department. "I swear that team is useless," one of them said, rolling his eyes. "They can't even handle basic tasks without falling apart." The other manager laughed. "Yeah, well, what do you expect? We're not hiring the best and brightest down there." Malik felt his stomach churn. This was how they talked about their employees? As if they were disposable, unimportant? It was no wonder morale was at an all-time low. But it wasn't just the managers who were part of the problem. Malik began to notice that this culture of elitism and disregard for lower-level employees had seeped into other parts of the office. Even some of the mid-level employees seemed to have adopted this attitude, treating those below them with the same coldness and condescension they received from their own superiors. It was a vicious cycle, and Malik could see how it had spiraled out of control. Leaders treated their teams poorly, so those teams in turn treated others poorly. And it wasn't just about work performance. There was a palpable lack of respect for people as individuals. Employees weren't seen as valuable contributors to the company's success. They were seen as expendable cogs in the machine. In one particularly telling moment, Malik watched as an IT worker, Henry, patiently tried to help a colleague fix a recurring technical issue. Henry was one of the few bright spots in the office, always smiling, always willing to lend a hand. But his efforts were often met with indifference, and sometimes even hostility. The colleague he was helping, a marketing associate, barely acknowledged his assistance, brushing him off as soon as the issue was resolved. "Thanks, I guess," the associate muttered, before turning back to her work, not bothering to make eye contact. Henry simply smiled and walked away, but Malik could see the frustration in his eyes. Why was kindness so undervalued here? Why was it that employees like Henry, who genuinely cared about their colleagues, were overlooked, while those who treated others with disdain were allowed to rise through the ranks? The more Malik observed, the more he realized that this wasn't just a problem with a few bad managers. This was a systemic issue. The company's culture had become toxic from the inside out, and it was affecting every level of the organization. Later in the week, Malik found himself at the front desk again, taking a moment to catch his breath after a particularly busy morning. As he glanced around the office, he saw familiar faces moving in and out, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and frustration. But there was one face that stood out to him, Angela, a senior accountant who had been with the company for years. Angela was often the first to arrive and the last to leave, her dedication to her work apparent in everything she did. Malik had always heard positive things about her from upper management, But from his new perspective, he could see that Angela was undervalued. Despite her hard work, she was often passed over for recognition, and her efforts were taken for granted. That afternoon, Malik overheard a conversation between Angela and a co-worker that drove this point home. "I've been passed over for promotion 3 times now," Angela said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I work harder than anyone else in this office, but it feels like, unless you're part of the right social circle, it doesn't matter how much you contribute." Her co-worker nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's all about who you know, not what you do." Malik felt a pang of guilt. Had his company really become this disconnected from its core values? Tech Vision was supposed to be a meritocracy, a place where hard work was rewarded and employees were given the opportunity to grow. But instead, it had become a place where connections and favoritism mattered more than dedication and skill. Angela wasn't the only one suffering from this culture of exclusion. Malik saw it in other employees as well, people who were talented, hardworking, and passionate about their work, but who were consistently overlooked because they didn't fit into the right social circles. The toxic culture had created an environment where only a select few thrived, while the rest were left to struggle in silence. As the days went on, Malik found himself growing more and more disheartened. He had built Tech Vision to be a company that empowered its employees, that fostered innovation and collaboration. But what he was seeing now was the exact opposite. Fear, intimidation, and elitism had taken over, and it was destroying the very foundation of the company. One afternoon, Malik decided to take a walk around the office, hoping to clear his head. As he passed by the various departments, he noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. In nearly every department, the same pattern was emerging. Employees were burnt out, overworked, and undervalued. The only ones who seemed unaffected were the senior managers, who carried themselves with an air of superiority, as if they were untouchable. Malik stopped in front of a large window that overlooked the office floor. From his vantage point, he could see the entire team, working tirelessly at their desks. They were the lifeblood of the company, the people who kept everything running smoothly, who handled the day-to-day tasks that allowed Tech Vision to thrive. But they were also the ones who were suffering the most. As Malik stood there, watching his employees go about their work, a thought occurred to him. This wasn't their fault. They weren't the ones who had created this toxic environment. It was the leadership, the very people he had trusted to uphold the company's values, who had allowed this culture to fester. And now, it was up to him to fix it. As the days went by, Malik found it increasingly difficult to separate himself from the role he was playing as Mike. His original intention had been to quietly observe, gather insights, and then make calculated changes once he returned to his rightful place as CEO. But now, standing at the front lines of his company, the emotional toll of what he was witnessing became too hard to ignore. He had always prided himself on running a company where everyone mattered, where each employee had a voice, and where hard work was rewarded. But the Tech Vision he was seeing from behind the receptionist desk was nothing like the company he thought he had built. Favoritism, elitism, and disrespect were rampant. The gap between management and lower-level employees was so wide, it felt like they were living in 2 different worlds. One morning, after a particularly stressful rush at the front desk, Malik stepped into the break room for a much-needed moment of quiet. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "Honestly, I can't believe we're still dealing with these complaints," said one of the senior managers, leaning casually against the counter. "The customer service team is a disaster, and HR, useless. If they can't keep the staff in line, why are they even here?" Another manager nodded in agreement, his voice dripping with frustration. "I don't know why we bother with them. Half of these employees act like they deserve special treatment. It's not our job to hold their hands." Malik clenched his jaw, feeling a surge of anger. These were the same people he had trusted to lead the company, the same managers he had believed were aligned with his vision. But their dismissive and condescending attitude toward their teams was everything he had fought against. The final blow came later that day when Malik crossed paths with Linda once again. He had been trying to keep a low profile, blending into the background as much as possible, but Linda's presence was impossible to ignore. She was, after all, one of the office's most influential leaders, and, as Malik had observed, one of the most problematic. That afternoon, as Malik was handling the steady stream of phone calls at the front desk, Linda approached, her expression one of thinly veiled annoyance. "Is this seriously how you're handling things?" she said, her voice sharp as she glanced around the disorganized front desk. "Papers everywhere, phones ringing nonstop, and you're just sitting there. No wonder this place is falling apart. It's because you people can't even do the basics right." Malik's heart skipped a beat. You people? What exactly did she mean by that? Her words carried an undertone that felt far more personal than a critique of his receptionist skills. It was a phrase that struck a deeper chord, one that Malik couldn't ignore. He glanced up at Linda, his mind racing. She had no idea who he was, but that wasn't the point. Her attitude, her complete lack of respect, was emblematic of everything that was wrong with the company. The way she looked down on him, on the employees she considered beneath her, was more than just bad leadership. It was toxic, and it was tearing the company apart from the inside. Linda's words echoed in Malik's mind long after she had walked away. He couldn't shake the feeling that her condescension wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. A problem that started at the top and worked its way down, poisoning the entire company culture. As Linda walked away, Malik felt a flood of emotions: anger, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of disappointment. He had built this company from the ground up, had trusted people like Linda to lead with integrity and empathy. But instead, they had become part of the problem, allowing a culture of fear and elitism to thrive under their watch. The idea that his managers were so disconnected from their teams was bad enough, but what Malik was seeing went beyond that. There was a complete lack of empathy, a sense that employees were nothing more than tools to be used and discarded when convenient. Malik had built Tech Vision on the belief that every employee mattered, that the company's success was directly tied to how well its people were treated. But now, that belief felt like a distant memory. But it wasn't just Linda. Throughout the day, Malik noticed how other managers behaved around their teams. Fear was the dominant emotion in the office. Employees avoided making eye contact with their supervisors, their conversations cut short whenever someone in a position of power walked by. It wasn't just that people were unhappy, it was that they were afraid to speak up, afraid of the consequences, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of not fitting into the right social circles. Malik had always envisioned Tech Vision as a company that empowered its employees, that encouraged innovation and collaboration. But what he was seeing now was the exact opposite. The hierarchical structure was so rigid, so deeply ingrained, that it stifled any possibility of genuine communication between management and staff. People weren't just unhappy, they were isolated. During his undercover days, Malik found an unexpected ally in Henry, an IT worker who had quickly become one of the few employees willing to speak openly with him. Henry's role often brought him into contact with different departments, and through his eyes, Malik saw even more of the cracks in the company's foundation. One afternoon, as Malik and Henry shared a quick conversation in the break room, Henry sighed and said, "You know, Mike, the way things are going, It's like no one upstairs cares about what happens down here. They only care about numbers and appearances. People are struggling, but it's like they don't exist to the higher-ups. Malik nodded, his stomach churning. Henry had no idea how true those words were. He had seen it for himself. The disregard, the indifference, the way management seemed to think they were above everyone else. This was not the company Malik had envisioned. But it wasn't just about Henry. Malik saw it in Angela, the senior accountant who worked tirelessly but was constantly overlooked for promotions. He saw it in the customer service team, who were overburdened and underappreciated. He saw it in the eyes of every employee who walked through the office doors each day, their shoulders slumped, their faces tired. Angela's situation was particularly heartbreaking. She was a dedicated employee, someone who clearly cared about her work, but she had been passed over for promotions 3 times. During one break room conversation, Malik overheard Angela confide in a colleague, "It doesn't matter how hard I work, they just don't see me. I'm invisible unless I'm rubbing elbows with the right people." Malik felt a pang of guilt. Had his company really become this disconnected from its core values? Tech Vision was supposed to be a meritocracy, a place where hard work was rewarded and employees were given the opportunity to grow. But instead, it had become a place where connections and favoritism mattered more than dedication and skill. The more he observed, the more Malik realized that the problem wasn't just a few bad managers or a few disgruntled employees. The problem was the entire system. The company had lost sight of its values, and somewhere along the way, the culture of empowerment and respect that Malik had worked so hard to cultivate had been replaced with one of fear and elitism. The next day, Malik returned to the front desk, determined to gather as much information as possible before confronting his leadership team. As he sat at his post, answering phones and directing visitors, he overheard yet another conversation that confirmed his growing fears. 2 department heads were discussing the upcoming quarterly review when one of them said, "Honestly, I'm not even worried about the review. As long as we hit the numbers, the board doesn't care how we get there." The other department head laughed. "Exactly. It's all about the bottom line. Let the employees figure out the rest." Malik's chest tightened. How had it come to this? When had Tech Vision stopped being about people and started being about profits at all costs? It was clear now. Malik had seen enough. The company was broken, and if he didn't act quickly, it would continue to spiral out of control. That evening, as Malik removed his uniform and returned to his normal life, he sat in his office, reflecting on the past week. He had come into this undercover role expecting to find some issues, maybe even a few difficult conversations. But what he had uncovered was far worse than he could have imagined. The culture at Tech Vision wasn't just unhealthy, it was toxic, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with a few policy changes or a new training program. It required a complete overhaul of the company's leadership structure, a radical shift in how employees were valued and treated. Malik knew that confronting his leadership team would be difficult. Some of them had been with him from the beginning, helping him build Tech Vision from the ground up. But loyalty to the past wasn't enough to justify the harm being done to the company's future. As he prepared for the next phase of his plan, Malik resolved to make some hard decisions. There would be consequences, and not everyone would come out unscathed. But if Tech Vision was going to survive, if it was going to thrive once again, Malik would have to take bold, decisive action. It was time to confront the truth and to start rebuilding his company from the ground up. As Malik continued his undercover role, the disillusionment that had settled in over the past week weighed heavily on his mind. He had seen the worst of Tech Vision's corporate culture. Managers like Linda who ruled through fear, employees disengaged from their work, and a hierarchy that prioritized favoritism over merit. But amidst the chaos, Malik began to notice something surprising: hidden talent, individuals who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without recognition or reward. One of the first employees that caught his attention was Angela, a senior accountant who had worked for Tech Vision for several years. Angela was always one of the first to arrive in the office and one of the last to leave. Her dedication was evident in everything she did, from meticulously preparing financial reports to offering help to colleagues who were struggling with their own workloads. But despite her hard work, Angela had been consistently overlooked for promotions. One afternoon, Malik observed Angela from his post at the reception desk. It was late, and most of the office had already emptied out for the day. Angela, however, was still at her desk, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen as she pored over the company's financial data. Malik watched as she meticulously cross-checked numbers, double-checking her work with a level of care that few others seemed to exhibit. As he watched Angela work, Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. Why had she been overlooked for so long? Angela's talent and dedication were undeniable, yet she had been passed over for promotion 3 times. It was as though her quiet diligence had made her invisible. Malik knew that if things continued the way they were, Tech Vision would lose someone like Angela, someone who genuinely cared about the success of the company. Later that evening, Malik overheard Angela talking to a colleague about her frustrations. "I've been passed over for promotion 3 times now," she said, her voice filled with disappointment. "It feels like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough. It's like I'm invisible unless I'm part of the right social circle." Her colleague nodded in sympathy. "I know exactly what you mean. It's not about how good you are at your job. It's about who you know. If you're not in with the right crowd, you don't stand a chance." Malik felt a pang of guilt. Angela was right. The culture of favoritism had taken root so deeply that even the most dedicated employees were being overlooked. The thought of losing someone like Angela, someone who clearly had the skills and drive to excel, was unsettling. Malik knew that if Tech Vision was going to thrive in the future, it needed to start recognizing and rewarding talent like hers. Angela wasn't the only hidden talent Malik discovered during his time undercover. Henry, the IT worker who had become something of a confidant to Malik, was another shining example of the untapped potential within the company. Henry was well liked by his colleagues, not just for his technical expertise, but for his positive attitude and willingness to help others. Whether it was troubleshooting a difficult computer issue or offering words of encouragement to a frustrated coworker, Henry was always there, quietly making the office a better place. One day, Malik observed Henry as he helped a new intern who had been struggling with a broken computer. The intern, clearly flustered and close to tears, had been trying to fix the issue for hours. Henry approached her with a warm smile and offered to help. "Don't worry," Henry said gently. "We'll figure it out together." For the next hour, Henry patiently worked with the intern, not only fixing the problem, but teaching her the basics of troubleshooting so she could handle similar issues in the future. By the end of their session, the intern was smiling, her confidence restored. Malik watched the interaction from a distance, feeling a sense of pride in employees like Henry. Why hadn't management noticed his leadership potential? Henry's kindness and technical expertise made him a valuable asset to the company, yet he remained in a junior role, his potential untapped. It wasn't just his technical abilities that stood out. Henry had a natural way of connecting with people. He diffused tense situations, reassured colleagues who were stressed, and lifted the office morale simply by being kind. Yet, because he wasn't someone who actively promoted himself or sought attention, he had gone unnoticed by senior management. In a system where visibility seemed to be more important than actual contributions, people like Henry were easily overlooked. As Malik reflected on his experiences with Angela and Henry, he began to see a pattern. Tech Vision was filled with employees like them, hard-working, dedicated individuals who went above and beyond their job descriptions but were consistently overlooked by management. These were the employees who kept the company running smoothly, yet they were the ones who received the least recognition. One afternoon, Malik decided to dig deeper into the company's promotion practices. He accessed some internal data and found that over the past few years, promotions had become increasingly rare, especially for employees in lower-level positions. The same names kept appearing on the list of promotions: employees with connections to upper management, those who were part of the in crowd. It was a troubling revelation. The system was broken. Malik realized that the promotion system wasn't just unfair, it was actively driving talented employees away. People like Angela and Henry, who should have been rising through the ranks, were being held back by a culture that valued connections over merit. And it wasn't just about promotions. Recognition in general was scarce. Hard work and dedication often went unnoticed, while those who played the political game within the company were rewarded. It wasn't just Angela and Henry who suffered from this system. Malik began to notice other employees, those who arrived early, stayed late, and worked quietly but diligently behind the scenes. There was Doris, the receptionist who had guided Malik through his first few days. Her job might have seemed simple to some, but Malik saw how vital she was to the smooth functioning of the office. Every phone call she answered, every visitor she directed, contributed to the daily operations of the company. Yet Doris, like so many others, was treated as though her work was insignificant. There was also Karen, a customer service representative who Malik noticed always stayed calm under pressure. One day, Malik observed Karen fielding an angry customer call. Despite the frustration and complaints thrown at her, Karen remained patient and professional, resolving the issue efficiently and leaving the customer satisfied. Her ability to handle stressful situations with grace was impressive, but as Malik had come to realize, skills like Karen's were often taken for granted. The more Malik observed, the more he realized that Tech Vision was filled with employees who had the potential to drive the company forward if only they were given the chance. Instead, the current system was stifling that potential, leaving talented individuals stuck in positions where they couldn't grow or be recognized for their efforts. Determined to make a change, Malik knew that recognizing hidden talent would be one of the key factors in turning Tech Vision around. Employees like Angela and Henry needed to be acknowledged, supported, and given the opportunity to grow. They represented the best of the company, and their contributions were vital to its success. But Malik also knew that simply recognizing talent wasn't enough. He needed to rebuild the system that had allowed this culture of favoritism to flourish in the first place. If Tech Vision was going to thrive in the future, it needed a promotion and recognition system that was transparent, fair, and based on merit. Employees needed to feel that their hard work mattered, that they had a path forward, and that their contributions were valued, regardless of their position or connections. As Malik continued his undercover work, he made it a point to observe more employees, searching for the hidden talent that had been overlooked for so long. He found it in the quiet, dedicated workers who stayed late to finish projects, in the team members who supported each other in times of stress, and in the employees who brought a positive attitude to the office every day, despite the challenges they faced. By the end of his week undercover, Malik had a clear understanding of what needed to change. The toxic culture at Tech Vision had obscured the company's greatest assets, its people. The hard-working, dedicated employees who had been ignored, undervalued, and overlooked for far too long. As Malik prepared to step back into his role as CEO, he knew that his first order of business would be to create a culture of recognition, one that celebrated hard work, rewarded talent, and provided opportunities for growth. It was time for Tech Vision to become the company he had always envisioned, a company where every employee, from the receptionist to the senior manager, had a voice and a future. By the end of his week undercover, Malik Johnson had gathered more than enough information. What he had uncovered was both eye-opening and disturbing. The company he had built, one that was supposed to be a beacon of innovation, inclusivity, and respect, had become something unrecognizable. The toxic culture he had witnessed wasn't just isolated to a few bad leaders. It was embedded deep within the system. It was in the way promotions were handled, the way managers interacted with their teams, and the way employees were left feeling invisible and unappreciated. As Malik sat alone in his temporary office late one evening, still disguised as Mike, the weight of everything he had observed settled heavily on his shoulders. This undercover journey had started with a desire to understand why employee satisfaction had dropped so significantly. Now, Malik knew the answer, and it wasn't pretty. The culture at Tech Vision was broken. Somewhere along the way, the values Malik had built the company on had been pushed aside in favor of profits, efficiency, and status. The company's leaders had lost sight of the fact that people were the true driving force behind the success of any business. Instead, they had become consumed by hierarchy, numbers, and results at the expense of employee well-being. Malik's experiences over the past week had shown him how disconnected he had become from the day-to-day realities of his own company. He had always trusted that his leadership team shared his vision for Tech Vision, but what he had witnessed proved otherwise. The conversations he overheard, the dismissive attitudes of managers like Linda, and the blatant disregard for employee concerns had all contributed to the erosion of the company's once thriving culture. But amid the disappointment and frustration, Malik also saw hope. There were still people like Angela, Henry, Karen, and Doris, employees who embodied the values that Malik had always envisioned for his company. These were the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without recognition or reward, to keep Tech Vision running smoothly. Their dedication and passion were undeniable, and Malik knew that if the company was going to survive, it needed to embrace and support these individuals. Sitting at his desk, Malik took a deep breath and began to formulate a plan. Tech Vision needed radical change, and it needed it fast. There was no room for half-hearted fixes or superficial solutions. The company needed to be rebuilt from the inside out, starting with its leadership. The first step in Malik's plan was to restructure the leadership team. Malik had seen firsthand how the current system was failing. The managers who were supposed to be leading by example had become complacent, relying on fear and intimidation to control their teams. Leaders like Linda would no longer have a place in his company. Malik made a mental note to start identifying which managers were part of the problem, and which ones had the potential to be part of the solution. Next, Malik knew that Tech Vision's promotion system needed a complete overhaul. The current system, which was based more on connections and favoritism than on merit, had to be scrapped. In its place, Malik envisioned a transparent, fair, and merit-based system where employees were promoted based on their contributions, not their social circles. Employees like Angela and Henry, who had been overlooked for years, would finally have the opportunity to rise through the ranks. But it wasn't just about promotions. Recognition had to be a core part of the company's new culture. Malik realized that many of his employees, particularly those in lower-level positions, felt invisible. Their hard work was often taken for granted, and they rarely received acknowledgement for their efforts. That needed to change. Malik planned to introduce a system where employees at all levels would be recognized for their contributions, whether it was through bonuses, promotions, or public recognition. The goal was to create a culture where every employee felt valued and appreciated. Malik envisioned monthly recognition ceremonies, where employees from all departments could be acknowledged for their achievements in front of their peers. This would not only give them the recognition they deserved, but also create a sense of unity and motivation across the company. Malik knew that a small gesture of recognition could go a long way in transforming the workplace culture. Another crucial aspect of Malik's plan was to improve communication within the company. One of the most glaring issues Malik had observed was the lack of open dialogue between leadership and employees. The hierarchical structure had become so rigid that lower-level employees were afraid to speak up, while managers rarely listened to the concerns of their teams. To address this, Malik planned to implement regular feedback sessions, where employees could voice their opinions, concerns, and suggestions directly to management, without fear of retaliation. These sessions would be a two-way street. Not only would employees be able to give feedback, but managers would also be expected to communicate transparently about company goals and decisions. Additionally, Malik considered creating an anonymous reporting system where employees could submit their concerns and experiences without fear of repercussion. He realized that not everyone would feel comfortable speaking up directly, so this would give employees a safe outlet to raise issues. More importantly, it would give Malik and the leadership team an unfiltered view of the company's pulse. As Malik wrote down his ideas, he couldn't help but think about how disconnected he had become from the very people who made his company successful. For years, he had been focused on growth, expansion, and staying ahead of the competition. But in doing so, he had lost sight of the heart of the company, its employees. It was a sobering realization, but one that Malik knew was necessary if Tech Vision was going to thrive in the future. There was one more piece of Malik's plan that he knew would be difficult but crucial: holding people accountable. Over the past week, he had seen managers and leaders act in ways that went against everything Tech Vision was supposed to stand for. Those individuals, people like Linda, would have to face the consequences of their actions. Malik was prepared to make tough decisions, including letting go of employees who had contributed to the toxic culture. But this accountability would extend to everyone, including himself. Malik knew that as CEO, he bore responsibility for allowing the culture to deteriorate in the first place. He would have to lead by example, showing his employees that no one, not even the CEO, was above the company's core values. Malik also decided that part of the accountability process would involve retraining the leadership team. Before making any drastic decisions, he wanted to give his managers the chance to learn and grow. He planned to implement leadership training programs that focused on empathy, team building, and inclusive leadership. Those who were willing to change and embrace these new values would be given the opportunity to stay and help rebuild the company. But for those who refused to adapt, there would be no place at Tech Vision. With his plan taking shape, Malik felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't going to let Tech Vision continue down this path of self-destruction. There was still time to turn things around, and it all started with a commitment to rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up. As Malik prepared to step back into his role as CEO, he knew the road ahead would be challenging. Change on this scale was never easy, and there would undoubtedly be resistance from some members of the leadership team. But Malik was ready to face those challenges head-on. The Undercover experience had opened his eyes to the realities of his company, and now he had the clarity and vision needed to move forward. In the coming weeks, Malik would implement his plan, starting with one-on-one meetings with his leadership team. He would confront the managers who had allowed the toxic culture to take root, and he would offer support to those who were willing to help him rebuild. He would meet with employees like Angela, Henry, Karen, and Doris, ensuring that their voices were heard and their contributions recognized. As he stood by his office window, looking out at the city skyline that had once symbolized success, Malik felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This was his company, and he was ready to fight for it. The day Malik returned to his role as CEO was not like any other. He entered the office with a newfound sense of purpose, yet there was an underlying tension. His undercover experience had provided him with all the information he needed to take action, but he knew that confronting his leadership team would be no small task. Many of the people he had once trusted to uphold the company's values had been part of the very problem he now sought to fix. Malik's goal was not just to confront these issues, but to pave the way for a new beginning, one that would transform Tech Vision into the company he had always envisioned. Malik called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. As they gathered in the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Linda, who had become a focal point of Malik's observations during his undercover role, sat near the front, her usual confident demeanor showing subtle signs of discomfort. The other managers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what this meeting would entail. When Malik entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Gone was the Mike they had barely noticed over the past week. Now, standing before them was Malik Johnson, the CEO, with a new clarity in his eyes. He wasted no time getting to the point. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Malik began, his voice calm but firm. "There are serious issues within this company that we need to address. Over the past week, I've been undercover, working within the company as a receptionist. I've seen and heard things that deeply concern me." A ripple of shock spread across the room. Some managers looked genuinely surprised, while others, like Linda, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Malik could see the wheels turning in their minds as they processed what he had just revealed. They hadn't expected this. "I've seen how our employees are being treated," Malik continued. "I've witnessed managers dismissing their concerns, ignoring their hard work, and in some cases, treating them with outright disrespect. This is not the company I built, and it's certainly not the company I want to lead." The room fell into a heavy silence. No one dared to speak. Malik let the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Our employee satisfaction has dropped by 15%, and now I understand why. We've lost sight of what truly matters, the people who keep this company running. Too many of you have allowed a culture of fear and elitism to take root, and that ends today." At this point, Linda spoke up, her voice defensive. "Malik, I think you're overreacting. Every company has its challenges, and employee dissatisfaction is something we've been working on. But you can't expect us to make everyone happy all the time." Malik fixed his gaze on her, his expression unflinching. "This isn't about making everyone happy, Linda. It's about treating people with respect. It's about creating a culture where every employee feels valued, not just the ones at the top." Linda's face reddened, but she remained silent. Malik turned his attention back to the rest of the room. "I've seen extraordinary dedication from employees like Angela and Henry, people who have been overlooked and undervalued for far too long. They, along with others, represent the future of this company, but they won't stick around if we continue down this path." Malik took a deep breath and then laid out his plan. "From this point forward, we will be implementing major changes. First, the leadership structure will be re-evaluated. Some of you have contributed to the toxic culture, and we will be having one-on-one meetings to discuss your roles moving forward. If you are willing to embrace the new direction of this company, there will be opportunities for you to learn and grow. But for those who continue to perpetuate the problems I've seen, there will be consequences." The managers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Malik knew that his words were sinking in, and that the changes ahead would not be easy for some of them to accept. "We will also be overhauling our promotion and recognition system," Malik continued. "From now on, promotions will be based on merit, not connections. Employees like Angela and Henry will no longer be overlooked simply because they aren't part of the right social circle. Hard work will be rewarded, and favoritism will no longer dictate who rises through the ranks." A few managers nodded, though some looked uncertain. Malik knew there would be resistance, but he also knew that change was necessary. "Finally," Malik said, his tone softening, "we will be focusing on rebuilding trust. Communication will improve across all levels of the company. Employees will have a voice, and they will be heard. We will introduce regular feedback sessions and create an anonymous system where employees can report concerns without fear of retaliation. This company will no longer operate in silos, where the leadership team is disconnected from the reality on the ground." As Malik finished outlining his plan, the room remained silent. He could sense the uncertainty in the air, but also a glimmer of hope. Not everyone in the leadership team had been part of the problem. Some had simply been blind to what was happening. Malik was counting on those individuals to help him rebuild the company from the ground up. "We have a long road ahead of us," Malik said, his voice steady but resolute. "But I believe we can turn things around. It's going to take hard work, commitment, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But if we succeed, Tech Vision will become the company it was always meant to be." After the meeting, Malik scheduled one-on-one sessions with each of the senior managers. Some, like Linda, were defensive and resistant to change. In her meeting, Linda questioned why Malik felt the need to make such sweeping changes so quickly. "Malik, don't you think these changes are a bit too radical? We've worked hard to bring the company to this point." Malik listened to her objections but remained firm. "Linda, I know you're used to the way things have been done, but we can't afford to lose sight of our people. It's about more than just results on a spreadsheet. It's about building a culture that fosters long-term success and well-being. If we don't fix this now, the damage will only deepen." Others, however, were more open to Malik's vision and willing to take responsibility for their roles in the company's culture. Managers like Chris, the head of operations, expressed relief. "I've been feeling the disconnect for a while now, Malik," Chris admitted, "but I didn't know how to address it. I'm glad we're making these changes. I think they're overdue." Malik was prepared to make difficult decisions, including letting go of those who refused to change. But for those who were ready to embrace the new direction, he offered support, training, and a path forward. In the days that followed, Malik began meeting with the employees he had observed during his undercover role. His first stop was Angela's desk. When he approached her, she looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting the CEO to pay her a personal visit. "Angela," Malik said with a smile, "I've been watching your work closely. You're one of the most dedicated employees in this company, and I want to personally thank you for everything you've done." Angela blinked in shock, her eyes widening. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That means a lot." "But it's not just about thanking you," Malik continued. "It's about making sure you're given the opportunities you deserve. Starting today, I'm promoting you to Senior Financial Analyst. You've earned it." Tears welled up in Angela's eyes, and she smiled. "I don't know what to say. Thank you so much." Next, Malik found Henry in the IT department. Henry greeted him with his usual warm smile, but there was a hint of confusion in his expression. Malik had never been this hands-on before. "Henry, I wanted to let you know that I've been watching how you interact with your colleagues. Your technical expertise is impressive, but even more so, your leadership skills stand out. I'd like to offer you a promotion to head of IT. You've more than earned it." Henry's smile grew wider. "Wow, thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll do my best." Malik nodded. "I know you will." In the weeks and months that followed, Malik's changes began to take root. Employees started to feel a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. The toxic culture that had once plagued the company slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a culture of recognition, respect, and collaboration. Malik remained actively involved, meeting regularly with employees, attending feedback sessions, and ensuring that the company's new values were reflected in every aspect of its operations. Tech Vision had been given a new beginning, and with it, Malik felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. The company was on the right path now, one that valued people as its greatest asset. And for Malik, that was the most important victory of all.